0. That is the number that should have been the headline. Not 26 points, not the triple-double, not the record count that lit up every sports feed from coast to coast by midnight. 0. Because buried inside one of the most statistically loaded performances in the WNBA history is a single split that most people scrolled right past, and it tells you more about where Caitlin Clark actually is as a basketball player than any of the milestones that trended for 6 hours straight after the final buzzer. Every single rebound she pulled down on Friday night came off the defensive glass. 10 boards, 0 from the offensive end, not 1. And the reason that matters so much is that offensive rebounds are almost always the product of instinct. You miss a shot, you crash, you want the ball back. Defensive rebounds require positioning, awareness, and timing. They require you to read the floor before the shot even goes up, to already be in the right place when everyone else is reacting. A guard going for 10 defensive boards in a professional basketball game is not an accident. It is a statement about where her game has quietly gone while everyone else was busy counting records. And that is before we even get to the number buried deeper in the box score, the one that has no comparison anywhere in the history of this league, the one that almost nobody has said out loud yet. We are going to get there, but first, the receipts, because nothing in this breakdown gets stated without proof sitting right underneath it. July 31st, 2026, the Moda Center in Portland, Oregon, the Indiana Fever, 112, the Portland Fire, 98. That final score does not fully capture what happened inside that building, but it is a real starting point. The Fever's 5th straight win, their 9th victory in the last 11 games, a record that now sits at 19 wins and 10 losses, good enough for 4th place in the entire league. Not 4th in the East, 4th overall. For a franchise that spent years being the punchline of every competitive balance conversation in women's basketball, that number deserves to be read twice. Caitlin Clark's line for the evening: 26 points, 10 rebounds, 10 assists, 34 minutes on the floor. 4th career triple-double, 1st of this season. And with that, she now owns more triple-doubles than any guard in the recorded history of this league. That is a sentence worth pausing on, because the WNBA is not a young organization. It has been running professional basketball for nearly 3 decades. There have been elite guards at every stage of that timeline, and not one of them owns that particular line in the record book the way she does now. But the night was never just about Clark. 6 Indiana players finished in double figures. Kelsey Mitchell matched her point for point, dropping 26 of her own, in a performance that deserved its own full breakdown and largely got buried under the triple-double coverage. Monique Billings added 15. Sophie Cunningham came off the bench and dropped 13 in one of the stranger environments any professional basketball player has competed in all season. Michaela Timson attacked the rim and opened up the 4th quarter in a way that made it clear this team has depth it did not have 12 months ago. Portland, for their part, fell to 11 wins and 18 losses, 4 straight defeats, a young franchise still figuring out what professional basketball at this level actually demands. The Fire had their moments in the first half, kept it close enough to make the crowd believe, then watched the Fever pull away in a 3rd quarter that felt like a gear shift more than a run. The final margin tells you that Indiana was always in control. The game itself told you Portland never stopped competing. Now, the records, because the number circulating online the morning after was 12. 12 records in a single night, and this breakdown does not repeat numbers without verifying them first. Start with what is genuinely, unambiguously historic. Early in the 1st quarter, Clark converted a bucket that pushed her career point total past 1,500. She reached that mark in 78 games. By the time the final buzzer sounded and the Fever were shaking hands at half court, she had also become the fastest player in the WNBA history to reach 1,500 points and 651 assists combined, finishing the night at 1,524 points and 651 assists combined.
Now, consider what that actually means. Sue Bird, who is widely regarded as the greatest point guard in the history of this league and one of the most decorated basketball players of any gender in American history, needed 116 games to reach that same combined milestone. Clark did it in 78. That is 38 games of separation, nearly an entire additional half-season worth of runway that Bird needed, and Clark did not. And this is not some quirk of pace or a byproduct of playing in a higher scoring era where every number inflates automatically. This is a rate achievement, and rate achievements tend to survive era adjustments far better than raw totals do. That is genuinely historic. Full stop, no asterisk required. But here is where the honest part of this breakdown has to step in, because the 12 record number that went viral is doing something that sports media does constantly and almost never gets called out for. It is slicing the same achievement into progressively thinner pieces and counting each slice as a separate record. Fastest to 1,500 points and 500 assists, fastest to 1,500 points and 600 assists, fastest to 1,500 points and 665 assists. 3 separate records according to 3 separate posts from 3 separate accounts, all chasing the same engagement on the same night. Except, those are not 3 separate conquests. That is one historic combination being measured at 3 different checkpoints along the same road, and then counted 3 times as though each checkpoint represents a different destination. The same thing happens with the triple-double framing. 4th career triple-double is one number. Tied for 3rd most all-time among all players is a different angle on that same number. Most ever by a guard is a 3rd angle on that exact same number. When you stack those 3 together and present them as 3 distinct records, you are not giving someone more information. You are giving them the same information wrapped in 3 different boxes and hoping they do not notice the boxes came from the same shelf. Strip the duplicates, be honest about what remains. You are left with roughly 5 or 6 genuinely distinct league-level marks that held up after scrutiny, not 12, 5 or 6. That is still an absurd number for a single basketball game. That is still a night that will be cited in WNBA history pieces for the next 20 years. But inflating it to 12 does not make the real achievements more impressive. It actually undermines them. Because the moment someone starts fact-checking and finds that the number was padded, they begin questioning everything attached to it, including the parts that were completely legitimate. 5 or 6 real records is an extraordinary night. Presented as 12, and you hand critics a reason to dismiss the whole thing. That is bad journalism and worse math. The truth is impressive enough on its own. Which leads directly into the second uncomfortable thing that needs to be addressed before this script spends another word celebrating the performance. Portland is a first-year expansion franchise. Let that sit for a moment before moving past it. This is a roster that was assembled from scratch approximately 12 months ago. Players who were not good enough to stick on existing rosters or who were available in the expansion draft because established teams calculated that losing them was an acceptable cost. 11 wins and 18 losses coming into Friday night, 4 straight defeats, a defense that had been surrendering points in bunches for the better part of 2 weeks. Indiana's 5-game streak of scoring 100 or more across the board is real. It's the longest such streak the WNBA has ever seen at this level, and that is a legitimate team record worth acknowledging. But when you look at who those 100-point performances came against and understand that a meaningful portion of that streak was built against a roster that did not exist 18 months ago, context starts to attach itself to the number in ways that demand honesty. Scoring runs against expansion teams happen. They happen in the NBA. They happen in every professional league that brings new franchises in and asks them to compete immediately against organizations with years of infrastructure, chemistry, and roster depth. It does not make the numbers fake. It makes them incomplete without the context. Except, and this is the part of the story that saves the whole thing from being a simple caveat,
Portland is not some soft opponent that showed up and let Indiana run through them without resistance. This exact Portland Fire in this exact building held Caitlin Clark to 6 points 2 months ago. 6 on 1 of 7 shooting, with Indiana losing by 16 in a game that was never particularly close after the first quarter. If the Fire were simply an overmatched expansion team with no ability to challenge elite players, that result does not happen. It doesn't come close to happening. Friday was not a comfortable night against a pushover. It was a rematch, and rematches carry a completely different kind of weight. Rewind to May 30th, 2026. Same building, same court, different story entirely. Portland Fire, 100, Indiana Fever, 84.
Clark's line from that evening: 6 points on 1 of 7 shooting, 6 assists, 2 rebounds, 22 minutes, and 5 personal fouls, with her 4th foul coming in the 3rd quarter. That last detail is important because in a professional basketball game, picking up your 4th foul in the 3rd quarter is effectively a coach's nightmare. You either sit your best player down at the worst possible moment, or you leave her on the floor and pray she does not foul out entirely, which removes her from the game and removes any remaining offensive threat simultaneously. There is no good option. White chose to limit Clark's minutes and the offense never recovered. But here's a detail that the recap videos from that game kept getting wrong, and it matters for understanding what Portland actually did and how difficult it actually was to pull off. Portland did not jump out to a lead and then collapse. Portland jumped out to the lead and held it from the opening possession. The Fire went up 29-15 after the first quarter. They pushed it to 44-26 in the second quarter. They led by 13 at halftime, 50-37, and then they pushed the advantage to 25 points in the third, before Portland's head coach Alex Sharama started sitting his own starters because the outcome was no longer in doubt. Megan Gustafson dropped 22. Carla Leidy went for 18 points and 12 assists. Emily Engstler had 16 points and 10 rebounds. Those were the first 2 double-doubles in Portland Fire franchise history, and they happened at Indiana's expense in front of a sellout crowd of 19,347 people who treated that arena like a playoff venue from the opening tip. There is another layer underneath that result that most coverage either missed entirely or mentioned in passing without recognizing what it meant. Clark did not even play in Indiana's previous meeting with Portland on May 21st because of a back injury. The team disclosed that injury less than 2 hours before tip-off, which was late enough that the league office sent Indiana a formal warning for failing to meet injury reporting requirements. The Fever won that game, 109-73, without her. Then she came back 9 days later and walked into a building where Portland's coaching staff had spent 2 weeks preparing specifically for her return, and they swarmed her in a way that no team had managed all season. She has since missed further time this year dealing with that same back issue. She only returned to the floor within the last several weeks before the Portland rematch, and Stephanie White has been deliberately managing her minutes because of it, keeping her under 35 a night to make sure the back does not become something more serious as the season enters its final stretch. Keep all of that in your pocket because it changes how you read every single number from Friday night. What Clark did on July 31st was not simply a great performance against a struggling team. It was a specific, intentional response to the worst result of her professional season, executed in the exact building where that result happened, against the exact team that engineered it. That context transforms the night from a statistical highlight into something that actually reveals character and growth in ways that box scores alone cannot capture. Portland's game plan in May was simple, and it was brutal, and it worked to perfection. Bump her at every opportunity, crowd her before she can get into rhythm, put 2 bodies on her every time she crossed half court, get her into foul trouble early so that the offense loses its engine in the first half and never gets it back. Force Indiana into a situation where they are playing meaningful minutes without their most important player while already down double digits.
It required discipline, coordination, and a coaching staff willing to commit fully to a strategy that would only work if every player on the floor bought into it simultaneously. One breakdown in the scheme and Clark finds a crease and the whole game changes. Portland executed it without a single meaningful breakdown for 32 minutes. Indiana's counter on Friday was equally simple on paper, significantly harder to execute under pressure. Get downhill toward the basket, absorb contact instead of avoiding it, make the officials decide whether the contact being thrown at Clark constitutes a foul, and trust that enough of those decisions will go the right way over the course of 40 minutes. She lived at the free throw line, 14 conversions on 17 attempts. Those 17 attempts were 8 more than any other player on the floor had all night. 8. Read that again. The next most fouled player in the game attempted 9 free throws. Clark attempted 17. That is not a soft foul night where the officials decided to protect a star and hand her the line on minor contact. That is a guard putting her shoulder into a defender's chest, absorbing the hit, finishing or drawing the call, and then doing it again on the next possession, 17 times.
She stopped settling for pull-up jumpers from the perimeter, which is what Portland had successfully forced her into in May. She started driving downhill, accepting that she was going to take hits, and converting often enough to make the strategy unsustainable for the defense. By the third quarter, Portland's defenders were hesitating just slightly before initiating contact, and that hesitation was enough space for Clark to turn a tight game into a comfortable lead. That adjustment is what the headline numbers are actually measuring. The 26 points, the triple-double, the records, those are outputs. The input was a fundamental change in how she attacked the paint against a specific scheme that had previously beaten her. And that change was not something she improvised in the moment, it was preparation. Now, the number nobody has said out loud. Coming into Portland, Clark was averaging 7.9 assists per game, in 29.4 minutes per game. Run the math on that and you arrive at roughly 9.7 assists per 36 minutes, the standard measuring stick for production in professional basketball. She is generating that creation rate while simultaneously averaging 21.5 points per night, which puts her third in the entire league in scoring. Nobody in the recorded history of this league has ever carried that combination, that specific pairing of scoring volume and creation rate compressed into that few minutes of floor time. It does not exist anywhere in the WNBA record books, not from any guard, not from any era, not under any interpretation of the numbers that holds up under scrutiny. Most elite floor generals need 34 or 35 minutes to reach 9 assists in a game. They need that many possessions, that many minutes of operating as the primary engine of the offense, that many opportunities for the ball to flow through their hands. Clark is producing that rate in under 30 minutes per night because her head coach is deliberately pulling her to protect a back injury that has already cost Indiana games this season. She is not compiling statistics over long stretches of clock time. She is compressing production into a smaller window than anyone in this league has ever been asked to manage at this level. That is the number with no precedent, not the triple-double, not the point total, the rate, the efficiency with which she is generating offense in the minutes she is actually on the floor. And because this breakdown does not believe in selective honesty, the tax on that rate needs to be stated clearly. She is averaging 4.7 turnovers per game. That is high. That is the second highest figure of her career, and it is the single most legitimate, defensible criticism anyone can make about her season. If you are looking for a reason to push back on the narrative, the turnover rate is the place to start. It is real, it is a problem, and it costs Indiana possessions that could shift outcomes in close games. But watch what happens when you apply a trend line to that number instead of treating it as a static fact. As a rookie in 2024, Clark averaged 5.6 turnovers per game. She has cut nearly a full turnover off that average while simultaneously raising her assist rate, raising her scoring efficiency, and compressing all of it into fewer minutes.
She is 44% from the field, 35% from three, and 87% at the free throw line. Those numbers represent a player who is actively solving the exact problem that critics were loudest about 2 years ago. Anyone still leading with the rookie year turnover rate as their primary criticism is quoting a statistic that is out of date by 2 full seasons. That talking point has an expiration date, and the expiration date was approximately 1 year ago. Kelsey Mitchell matched Clark's output point for point, and her performance on Friday deserves significantly more than the 2-sentence mention it received in most post-game summaries. 26 points, and that was her 13th consecutive game scoring 20 or more. 13 straight. That streak ties Diana Taurasi for the second longest in league history, with only Aja Wilson's 15-game run sitting above it on the all-time list. Think about the company that sentence puts Kelsey Mitchell in. Diana Taurasi is arguably the greatest scorer in the history of women's professional basketball. Aja Wilson is the reigning MVP of this league and one of the most dominant players of her generation. Mitchell is now in that conversation on the basis of a sustained stretch of scoring production that has been extraordinary in its consistency and largely overlooked because it has happened at exactly the same time as a teammate generating headlines every night.
She also hit the three-pointer that pushed her to 749 career makes from beyond the arc, passing Tina Thompson for 6th on the all-time list. Thompson played 15 seasons in an era when the three-point line was treated by most coaches and players as a last resort rather than a primary weapon. Mitchell passed her career total in a fraction of the time. The way she did it on Friday was exactly what veteran scorers do when they understand their role in a larger system. She let Clark run the first half. She let the defense exhaust itself trying to account for what Clark was doing. Then she detonated for 11 points in the third quarter and 8 more in the fourth, turning a close game into a comfortable win at precisely the moment Portland needed a stop to get back into it. Aaliyah Boston's line looks quiet until you actually read every column. 9 rebounds, 6 assists, 5 steals. No double-digit point total, nothing that jumps off the page in a traditional box score reading. But those 5 steals were the hidden swing of the entire game. They converted defensive possessions into instant transition offense at moments when Portland was starting to build momentum, carting into Indiana's lead and threatening to make things genuinely uncomfortable. One of those steals ended in a Sophie Cunningham three-pointer that extended the Fever's advantage at exactly the right moment. Boston also climbed to 3rd in franchise history in career field goals made, passing Katie Douglas in the process, a name that every longtime Fever supporter recognizes as one of the foundational pieces of this franchise. Monique Billings added 15 off the bench. Michaela Timpson attacked the rim in the fourth quarter and kept the offense running when Clark's minutes were being managed late in the game. What that depth chart represents is the solution to the single biggest problem Indiana carried into this season. Last year, the Fever were a team that was dangerously dependent on one player. The moment Clark sat down, the offense stalled, the energy shifted, and opponents who had been suffocating under the pressure of guarding her suddenly had room to breathe and collect themselves. That vulnerability was apparent to everyone, discussed constantly, and never fully addressed until this offseason. It is fixed now. That is not hyperbole. 6 players in double figures against a team that was specifically prepared to deal with the primary threat is as clear a demonstration of genuine depth as a box score can provide. Then there is Sophie Cunningham, and what happened inside the Moda Center every time she checked in off the bench deserves its own section, because it was unlike anything the WNBA has seen in a regular season game in recent memory. The Portland crowd booed her, loudly, consistently, starting midway through the first quarter and continuing through every subsequent appearance. Fans were on their feet waving small transgender pride flags whenever Cunningham touched the ball or simply stepped onto the floor. The atmosphere in that building surrounding her specifically was charged in a way that was impossible to ignore, and that no amount of crowd noise or stadium music was going to drown out.
The context is that Cunningham had made comments in a national profile published a few weeks before this game that sparked an immediate and significant backlash online and in the media. Rallies were organized both supporting and opposing her position, with some taking place outside the Moda Center on the night of the game itself. The political conversation surrounding what she said had been running for weeks by the time the teams tipped off, and Portland's fan base made clear from the opening minutes that they had not forgotten or moved past it. Whatever your personal position on the underlying politics, and this breakdown is not the place to adjudicate that debate, look at what she actually did on the floor on Friday night. 13 points, 4 of 6 from the field, 3 of 5 from beyond the arc, a plus-minus of plus 18, the second best plus-minus of anyone in the building, behind only Clark's plus 23. She missed 2 shots all night, 2. In an environment where the crowd was generating organized noise against her specifically every time she touched the ball, in a building where the atmosphere was as hostile toward one individual player as anything a regular season game typically produces, she made 4 of her 6 field goal attempts and 3 of her 3-point attempts and was one of the 2 most impactful players in the game by the metric that most directly measures individual contribution to the final outcome. Her words before tip-off, when asked about the situation, were about as unbothered as it is possible to sound before walking into that kind of environment. She said that at the end of the day, she comes in, does her job, and that is what she is focused on. The scoreboard agreed with that assessment more completely than anyone in that arena who was booing her probably expected it to.
Stephanie White, for her part, refused to let the post-game conversation become about the Cunningham situation at all. She acknowledged the noise around it, said the group wants to talk about basketball and focus on growing as a team, and framed the whole thing as part of a broader story about where this league is and where it is going. Read between the lines on those comments, and you can hear a head coach actively trying to keep a 5-game winning streak from getting swallowed by a news cycle that has nothing to do with basketball. Whether she succeeded in redirecting the narrative or not, her message to the team was clear. We are here to win games. She also made a point of addressing the triple-double directly, or rather, of addressing how little attention she had paid to it during the game itself. She said she did not even recognize Clark had a triple-double until the team got into the locker room. What she was focused on, she said, was the area where Clark has shown the most consistent improvement this season, defensive rebounding, which loops directly back to that 0 from the opening of this breakdown. 10 defensive rebounds, 0 offensive. It was not an accident, it was a focus area, and the coach noticed it before she noticed the record. Here is the question that the highlight reels from Friday either skipped entirely or buried at the end of a summary once the clicks were already in. What does Indiana's offense actually look like when you adjust for the quality of opponent? 5 consecutive games scoring over 100 points is genuinely unprecedented in WNBA history. It is a real team record, and it represents a level of offensive consistency that this franchise has never achieved before. But 3 of those 100-point performances came against teams currently sitting outside the playoff picture, and Portland had just surrendered 4 consecutive losses coming in, with a defense that was giving up points freely, and a roster dealing with the accumulated fatigue and morale challenges that come with a losing streak of that length. The records are real, the performances happened, but the sample has been kind in terms of opposition, and the next 3 weeks are going to strip that kindness away immediately. Minnesota on August 2nd, the Las Vegas Aces on August 6th, Chicago on August 8th. 15 games remain in a 44-game season. Those 3 opponents, coming back to back to back, represent the sharpest possible test of whether what Indiana has been doing over the last 2 weeks is genuine offensive evolution or a streak that was enabled partly by favorable scheduling. Minnesota has one of the most disciplined defensive systems in the league. The Las Vegas Aces have more playoff experience than any roster Indiana will face, and their ability to make mid-game adjustments is the standard against which every other team in this league measures itself.
Chicago has been inconsistent, but has the defensive personnel to make Clark uncomfortable when their scheme is executing correctly. If Indiana is still scoring in triple digits against that gauntlet, if Clark is still producing at this rate against defenses that have the personnel and the preparation to actually slow her down, then this is a legitimate title-caliber offense, and the conversation about where this team finishes in October becomes unavoidable. The phrase championship contender stops being aspirational and starts being analytical. If the numbers fall off significantly against those opponents, if the scoring drops back into the 80s and the creation rate compresses under real defensive pressure, then Friday was a beautiful and genuinely historic night that carried an expansion-flavored asterisk nobody is going to want to acknowledge in the moment. My honest read is to split the difference and lean toward believing it, not because of the point total and not because of the records, but because of the assist rate. Padding points against a weak opponent is entirely possible and happens regularly across professional sports. Inflating a scoring line against a defense that is not fully committed or not fully healthy is a predictable outcome that tells you almost nothing about a player's actual level. Inflating a creation rate in protected minutes against a team that has already beaten you once this season is a different thing entirely. You cannot manufacture assists at 9.7 per 36 minutes by virtue of your opponent being tired or undermanned. Assists require teammates to make shots, which requires the ball to be delivered in precisely the right spot at precisely the right moment, which requires a level of vision and decision-making that does not change based on how good the defense is on any given night. Either you see the floor at that level or you do not. Clark clearly does.
The 78-game milestone is also not something that weakens against era or opposition adjustments. Sue Bird needed 116 games to reach the same combined points and assists mark. That is not a number that inflates or deflates based on Portland being a first-year franchise. It is a career trajectory, and career trajectories reflect consistent performance over hundreds of possessions against dozens of different opponents. You do not accidentally reach a milestone in 38 fewer games than the greatest point guard in league history. That gap requires excellence on nights when the opponent is trying to stop you, not just on nights when they cannot. 62 days ago, Caitlin Clark walked into the Moda Center and had the worst scoring night of her professional basketball career. 1 of 7 from the field, 6 points, foul trouble before halftime, 22 minutes, a loss that was never close. On Friday night, she walked back into that exact building against the exact team that had engineered that result and produced a performance that generated more verified historical achievements than any single WNBA game in recent memory. 26 points, 10 rebounds, 10 assists. A historic assist rate compressed into 34 minutes of floor time. A free throw attempt volume that demonstrated physical aggression rather than reluctance. A defensive rebounding split that her own head coach highlighted as the area of most consistent growth, and the specific, targeted adjustment in how she attacked the paint that made Portland's May game plan completely irrelevant. That is not a lucky night. That is not a favorable matchup producing inflated numbers that disappear when the schedule gets harder. That is a correction, a direct, intentional, professional-grade response to a failure that happened in this specific city against this specific opponent, delivered with the kind of precision that separates players who are talented from players who are genuinely great. The difference between a talented player and a great one is not what they do when things are going well. It is what they do the next time they face the opponent that beat them. Clark went back to Portland with a specific problem that needed solving and a specific approach to solving it, and she executed that approach well enough to generate 5 or 6 genuine records in the process. Whether those records survive the scrutiny of a tougher schedule over the next 15 games remains to be answered, but the response to the humbling is already on record, and it says something that no box score can fully capture.
The question worth sitting with tonight is not which of those 12 supposed records deserves the word historic. Most of them do not deserve it individually, and we have already done the honest accounting on that. The real question is whether what we are watching in real time is the construction of something that the WNBA has not seen before. A guard who scores at an elite volume, creates at an unprecedented rate, defends with intention, and adjusts specifically and effectively when the game demands it, all in under 30 minutes per night, with a bad back, on a franchise that was not competitive 3 years ago. That is either the story of a record-setting, title-winning season still in the process of being written, or it is the most compelling statistical outlier this league has produced in a decade, about to meet its match when Minnesota, Las Vegas, and Chicago get their turns. The Aces game is in 5 days. We're going to find out which version is closer to the truth. And when that game is over, whatever the result, the honest breakdown will be waiting right here.